That guy's going to be some senator one day.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Jesse Hughes Show. As you can see, unlike most days, I'm not alone this time.
Lucky for you guys.
This is going to be a good night.
This is going to be a great one.
This is my buddy Micah Allen. He's been on the podcast before. Some of you may recognize him. He is not new to the program. He is a close friend of the program, and we are having the time of our lives here in Lynchburg, Virginia.
As much as you can have the time of your life in Lynchburg, Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta make things happen as they go. That's why we do this, right?
That is why we yap into a microphone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes you gotta yap into the microphone to keep yourself sane. But it is a great night. We have a lot of crazy stuff to cover. First and foremost, many of y'all probably saw Monday night as J.D. Vance squared off against Tim Walz in the vice presidential debate. You know that this was a debate unlike any other that we have seen from the first and pure simple fact that it was actually boring. Which was a breath of fresh air.
It was the best debate we've had since 2012.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would say
I think
so.
I think it was overall like really the cleanest, best product of a debate.
Right.
Probably the most beneficial debate that we've had since Romney and Obama. Like,
No,
we're being
for
so
real.
for real.
Honestly, for real.
Even though they both sucked.
They're it's hard to come back from that when your candidate quality. Well, to be fair, Obama was a great speaker. I don't know what Romney was that gave him
they were
the
they were both good communicators.
Yeah.
It was just when it came down to the nitty-gritty of policy, it was a different deal.
Right.
But they could debate because they knew policy, and
Yeah.
Romney might be more of an establishment neocon than maybe like we prefer. And obviously we weren't big fans of Obama, but at the end of the day, they had a respectful civil debate, and they talked about their plans, which was my favorite part of the debate. They actually talked about their policy plans.
Which we got again Monday night or Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
It has been a long week. This is what law school does to your brain. So it was a somewhat surprisingly uneventful, except for a few moments, debate, which was honestly a breath of fresh air. We actually got to hear candidates talk about policy. They were cordial with one another. There were many times where they mentioned that they were in agreement with one another on things, which you never, ever see anymore.
My favorite
It's
part was
insane.
during the gun discussion,
Yes.
how like both of them came down to earth. Because I think when you have these discussions, a lot of the times it's, well, the Democrats, they hate you, they hate your Second Amendment rights, and they want to take your freedom. And the Republicans hate kids, they don't care about kids, they want school shootings to keep going. And you definitely did not see that. And they agreed on the premise that there is a problem with school shootings in the country that need to be fixed. And they disagreed on how to fix that.
Right.
And it was really good to see, first off, and this was the case with a couple different policy issues. I think the environment was the other one that really impressed me, where J.D. Vance was actually able to articulate a competent Republican policy position. Because you don't see that with these issues very often. Like, you saw him able to talk about how, like, increasing American manufacturing is going to help the global environment. You saw him talk about how increasing school safety is the better way of preventing school shootings rather than taking away gun rights. And they disagreed on that, obviously, like, the solutions. But it was good to hear the agreement. And it was good to hear J.D. Vance actually talk about real Republican policy solutions. Because, frankly, Trump just doesn't do that.
As much as I love Trump, that is one thing that he does not do well, and that is one thing that I think that the broader conservative movement as a whole doesn't do well. We have a lot of these like broad slogans and axioms like, we're pro-life. Okay, what are we going to do? What does that mean? We're pro-gun. Okay, what policies are we going to build from that? We're pro-family. Okay, what are you going to do to actually help families? Like, you hear people say these things, and, every once in a while Trump will come out with a policy plan, like we're going to have the largest mass deportation operation in, 100 years almost. And it's interesting how when they actually come out with policy plans, that's when you get the most media backlash, but that's also when you get the most support from the American people.
Yeah.
Because I think they mentioned in the debate something of north of 55% of Americans approve of the idea of the mass deportations.
Mm-hmm.
It's something the media hates and has a field day with, but over half the country is in support of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of this root of the issue with the Trump era, because I think that the reason that Trump, and I was actually just reading about this today, Harvard does a study at the end of every election where they do like a roundtable with all the different campaign managers. And I was listening through the 2016 one for a book report that I'm doing right now. And a lot of Trump.
You can tell we're in college.
Yeah. And a lot of like Trump, a lot of the Republican other candidates' campaign managers were talking about how Trump's ideas kind of transcended ideology, and which is accurate. Although there are big ideological things about Trump's platform, a lot of it has caused conservatives, especially younger conservatives, to stick to those slogans and ignore policy. They think it's really, really funny when Trump roasts people on the debate stage, but then when it comes down to actual policy, they can rarely actually articulate the solutions that we want to see. And that's a massive problem in conservatism. And it's a problem that is inflated when you see Donald Trump on a debate stage against even someone who is relatively incompetent at actually presenting policy solutions. It doesn't match up because he just comes up with these slogans, these ideas. It's going to be the greatest. It's going to be the best. You can't just write in a bill, this is going to be the greatest economy ever, sign it into law, and it's going to work. Like, you have to have real solutions. And that was the best part of J.D. Vance's debate, was bringing an actual substantive conservative platform to the masses. Now, how much debates in general, especially a vice presidential debate, will affect the outcome of this election, I have doubts about, but it was very refreshing to see and kind of gave me a little bit of hope for the future of American politics in the post-Trump era.
Absolutely. And I think that many people coming up into before Trump selected Vance as his vice president said that it's more than likely that whoever the vice president was going to be the heir apparent of the MAGA movement. Yeah. And if J.D. Vance is the heir apparent of the MAGA movement, I'm all for that, 100%. I don't think you could have picked a better person who has some of the more populist tendencies of Trump, but actually knows how to communicate ideas and messaging and policy in a intelligent, cohesive, coherent way that average Americans can understand. There's not that many people. You can make the case Vivek Ramaswamy might be one of the others who's good at that, but there's very few people besides Vance, Vivek, maybe sometimes DeSantis, even though DeSantis is a little less populist than they are, but there's nobody else I can think of that's really that good at it.
I think, like, as far as the heir apparent goes, I think you can still make the argument the Vance pick was a bit short-sighted. I was a Youngkin supporter for VP. I still think he probably would have been the better long-term choice. I think, although, again, he's kind of like DeSantis and that maybe he falls a little bit away from the populism side just a little bit more, I think that he probably would have been a better Republican for the future than maybe J.D. Vance is. But at the same time, like, if Vance is somebody who's going to continue the movement and somebody who's going to carry these policy ideas forward, it's good to have a young, fresh face who's able to actually articulate policy points and tell people how we're going to fix the problems that we have in our country.
Absolutely. And another thing that I think he does well, even though I kind of hate it, is that when it comes to controversial issues like abortion, while I don't like the answers that he gave necessarily during the debate, while I definitely think I have more of a pro-life position on that stuff than what was being espoused at the debate, I don't think Vance is like as pro-choice as I've seen some conservatives on Twitter trying to claim he is. I think what he is doing is he knows he needs to sell messaging to the broader public that isn't going to just shoot us in the foot. Because as much as I think that there are situations and places where we can be a little bit more graphic in our rhetoric of what actually happens in an abortion, and there are situations where that's appropriate, the debate stage in front of a national TV audience is not one of those places.
Yeah.
And if you want to have the American people actually start coming towards you on this issue, you do have to win their trust back, like he was saying.
Nobody has a strong, and this is the thing too, is like, and I won't go into specifics just here, but I don't think many people have a more pro-life stance than I do on issues. But a lot of times conservatives get this idea in their head that we're just going to pass a national abortion ban tomorrow. And that's so unrealistic and it hurts the cause. And the point is that while Vance is definitely not, I don't even think Vance is as pro choice as maybe he was alluding himself to be in the debate.
Right.
The point is that it's not happening right now. And abortion is a losing issue for Republicans. It's that simple. And it's unfortunate that's the place where our country is, but abortion is a losing issue for Republicans. And they have to, in the meantime, find a way to make it politically palatable to be pro-life. And I'm not saying that we need to enact anything. I'm not even saying we need to enact anything on the national level right now, although I'd like to in the future. It's really important to remember that we have a job to do on the state level. And honestly, that's probably the best chance you have is to make it popular enough on the state level to bring it up to the national level. And we might even disagree on this. But just at the end of the day, I think a lot of conservatives need to temper their expectations just a little bit and realize that we aren't winning on abortion right now.
I agree.
So our rhetoric is going to need to be a little bit more towards the center than even our policy is. And I don't think that's dishonest. I just think that's reality.
Yeah, no, I agree for sure. I think that one interesting tactic that I'd like to see is something that he did in the debate was he tied abortion into a broader pro-family policy.
Yeah.
And I think that instead of focusing solely on abortion, trying to put out comprehensive pro-family policy and have that as like a little footnote in there, that might be a better way to go forward on this. Because if we can prove to the American people that we're the party that's going to help you start a family, afford to raise that family, and afford to be able to have your purchase a house, then abortion's going to become a moot point at some point because people are going to want to have kids. They're going to have the economic opportunity to have kids.
Exactly.
And then we can start, I think that can help lead into a place where we can start having more conversations about how we get rid of abortion at a legal level. That doesn't mean we don't stop fighting in the meantime. There's still room for us to advocate and to do things to be able, whether it's going out to these Planned Parenthoods and advocating to mothers to not kill their kids, but to instead
There's a lot of
talk to
people.
us.
There's a lot of people who talk a big game on Twitter about banning abortion, but then just won't go do the practical things to
Right.
stop abortion from happening.
And I will say, I know a lot of people that do go out there and do, and shout out to you guys. And some of you guys, we have disagreements on it. I know that there's a lot of people who consider themselves part of the abolitionist movement that follow me. I guess I'm technically an abolitionist, but I don't consider myself part of the movement. But I mean, I know you guys actually do go out and do a ton of great work.
Exactly.
I just disagree with how you think we should get to where we need to go.
Yeah, there's a totally different. I mean, we can have a pro-life position and disagree about how to get to the end. And I don't think that it's ridiculous to say that a more gradual approach, to some extent, is acceptable.
Right. No, we gotta see where we're going on this. But another big thing, kind of staying in the realm of social policy, another big thing I take away from the debate was JD Vance did something that not a lot of people, I think, especially in our generation, just because of how society has molded us, were willing to do, and that's actually be able to stand up and say, no, actually, you're wrong to a woman. We kind of are in this feminized culture right now where if you like try to say anything to a woman and like be like, no, actually, this is how this thing happens, you get accused of mansplaining, you get called sexist, and he didn't care. He just went out there and said, no, this is what the law says. And I think that provides a good example of we don't have to be afraid to speak our minds, and we don't have to be afraid of like whatever labels people are going to throw at us. It doesn't matter if we're talking to men or women. If they're like wrong about something, it's totally okay to call it out.
Yeah, I just think regardless of the situation, it was just hilarious to watch him fact check the fact checkers. I mean, Trump doesn't have the ability or he doesn't have the just raw articulative ability to be able to go do that, and Vance did it, and he did it well. And I think it's about time that we start seeing more of that. It's unfortunate that somebody like Trump is probably generally incapable of doing that in a good way. But I hope that as we continue, especially in this era, and I guess honestly it probably would have been the same even if we were under the Commission on Presidential Debates still.
Right.
But like in this era of network run debates with CBS and ABC moderators, it's an era where we have to not be afraid to tell the moderators that they're wrong. And he gave a very articulate response and said, look, here's why you're wrong. Here's the reality. And I know how things work. And I think that it's good to know that the people who we're voting for know how things work, because
No,
frankly, Trump
100%.
doesn't. And that's a lot of what's good about him, but also at the same time, it's a massive weakness, especially on the debate stage that he continues to run into. And again, it was really impressive to see Vance on the stage doing that.
Yeah, Vance, he's had 2 jobs so far in this campaign cycle. The first was to be a good balance for Trump, which I had doubts about because I knew their policies were so similar. But just looking at how things have been, he has been a great balance for Trump.
He really has.
And then the second job, but more so for the debate, was that ever since the RNC and he got the nomination, we've seen this media smear campaign from the Harris campaign as well, calling him weird. His second job was just to go out there and prove, I'm not a weird guy, I'm a normal person, and I'm
Literally.
likable.
Yeah.
And he did that very, very well.
Yeah, I thought it was effective. I don't know if the weird messaging really stuck beyond a couple people on Twitter at all.
Right.
But I think that he was able to articulate his story. He was able to get his story out to the world, which is really the story of a lot of the voters that we're targeting. A lot of the voters, the low propensity voters in rural areas that Trump has been able to drive out. And he needs to drive out in November if he's going to win.
I will say, Vance has a very compelling story, and I'm glad he got the opportunity to share it. But funny story during the debate, I watched it here at home with some friends and my roommate who we were mutual friends with. And when he got started, he said, first off, I just want to say, I grew up in a working class family. And me and my roommate, we just both looked at each other and at the same time went, I grew up in a middle class family, and like the Kamala Harris line.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that's so funny.
Everyone and their brother, anyone who's running for public office at this point grew up in a middle class family, except for Trump.
Yeah, no, Trump is the only one who actually is honest about his background.
Yeah.
I mean, do y'all remember Small Loan of $1 million?
Wow.
What a time.
What a time that was.
Can you believe 2016 was actually 8 years ago?
I mean, that hit me the other day. I mean, baseball playoffs are going on right now. Big Yankees fan, so I was really excited to see the Astros go down. But the Astros have been to 8 straight ALCSs before this year, American League Championship Series, like the series before the World Series. And they were like, Obama was president the last time the Astros didn't make the ALCS. And I was like, wow. It's like, 8 years is a long time.
8 years is a long time. A lot can change.
Especially when it's been 8 years of Donald Trump politics.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. This has been... I feel like I'm going to look back at all this one day and ask myself, did that actually happen, or was this all just like a fever dream?
All the MAGA hats were a fever dream.
What was this period of life?
Yeah.
It all started when they shot that gorilla, I swear.
It's all Harambe, dude.
It's all Harambe's fault.
Harambe.
So, looking ahead, we've already talked about the fact that, and but just to preface, I know that this is way too early to be talking about any of this, but that's what makes it fun. I know we already talked about the fact that Vance is kind of standing in as heir apparent right now, especially if Trump wins. But what other figures are you looking at kind of determining where do I think this person's going to go? And who do you think rises in the case of a Trump victory, and who do you think rises in the case of a Trump defeat?
So let's start with the case of the Trump defeat, because that's way more interesting. In the case of a Trump victory, you're really just it's gonna be Vance.
Yeah.
Vance will be the heir apparent. I don't know if he'll get challenged. I think that the party is so infatuated still with Trump, for better or for worse, that they will do anything to keep him in power. As far as a voting standpoint, obviously, I don't think a lot of them would support a third Trump term if they tried to overthrow the government. I'm not trying to talk about something crazy like that happening, because
Right.
Because that would never happen. They would never
Why
do
would
that.
that ever
They would never
happen?
do that. They've never done that.
That's never
never
happened in world
before.
history ever before.
Yeah, it's never
ever.
happened, especially in the last 4 years. Never happened. No. But aside from that, I think that Vance is highly likely to be the next nominee if Trump wins. Maybe he gets an establishment challenger. Their support won't stick. I think what would be really interesting is really to see the direction the party would go if Trump lost. I still think Vance is the favorite. I still think that the party again is infatuated enough with Trump, where even if Trump was to lose this election, they would probably choose Trump's chosen heir apparent to go next. I mean, that's the whole reason they picked him. If we're being honest, if Trump wasn't beating Biden as badly as he was, he probably wouldn't have picked Vance. It probably would have ended up being Burgum. Maybe it would have ended up being Glenn Youngkin. We don't really know. But at the end of the day, the party is probably still going to go with the Trump vein. Trump will endorse Vance. It is what it is. So that's still the likely outcome. Other names I'm watching, I think you could see Ted Cruz make another shot at the national stage. I don't think that's necessarily likely, and I don't think that people would really get behind him either, because I think that, like, his sect of voters is kind of gone and scattered at this point. I think that Glenn Youngkin again is a really interesting name, especially if he beats Mark Warner in 2026. I know there's a lot of speculation that he's going to be running to take out Mark Warner in the Senate. If he does that, I think the appeal for Glenn Youngkin will be stretched. I think he does a really good job of being conservative, holding some of the populist policies, but he does it in a very palatable way. He appears very moderate when he's frankly not incredibly moderate.
No.
He governs a blue state relatively effectively, and he's just good at what he does. He's a good communicator, and he's an effective governor. So I think that Glenn Youngkin is a name to watch. I think a lot of the electability people, which I'm not as much of an electability person as I once was, but I still kind of consider myself an electability person, would very much jump behind Glenn Youngkin, because I would probably prefer to switch up from the Trump brand a little bit on the national stage. But that's a name that sticks out to me. You could probably see DeSantis throw his name back in the ring, but it probably does. I don't think that's going to stick. I think he blew his chance.
Yeah, if he wanted to have a chance in 28, he should have ran a much, much better campaign, because by the end of it, it just seemed like he didn't even care anymore.
Because he had two opportunities. He could run low key and tee himself up for next cycle, or he could go all out, and he did neither. He stayed in this weird middle ground, didn't articulate anything, ran an awful campaign, and screwed his career. Because the reality is he could have easily teed himself up for 2028, or he could have beaten Trump. And I know that's I know that's a hot take, but I really think he could have done it. He was only trailing Trump by 10% nationally at one point. I really think DeSantis could have beaten Trump if he ran the right campaign, but he didn't.
No.
And now his career is toast.
He hired horrible people. They ran a horrible campaign. Mm-hmm. Had a horrible, horrible launch.
Yeah, no kidding.
I think I realized as soon as I saw the X Space thing, and as soon as it ended up flopping, that's when I realized Trump's gonna win this. He cannot recover from this.
He was already the odds-on favorite, but any chance DeSantis had was just evaporated.
Right, and I don't think it didn't help DeSantis really. The biggest thing that launched Trump back into the ethos, and ironically, I think the thing that probably got Trump and Vance the most well-connected was in February 2023 when the train derailment happened in East Palestine, Ohio. And that gave Trump a lot of publicity because he went out there and actually talked to the people and acted like a president should act, while the federal government did not really much of anything like they're doing in my home state right now. We'll get to that later. But he went out there and actually interacted with people, just tried to see what he could do to help. And I think that also lit a fire inside of him, because he kind of seemed a little apathetic at first when he first started running, but then he saw, these are the people that I ran to fight for the first time. This is the people that I'm supposed to represent this time. I think that got Trump kind of back into the swing of things. But also, while Trump had campaigned with Vance in 22 when Vance was running for Senate, I think this was the first time that they really got an opportunity to really sit down and meet one another and get to see how each other operate. And I think that probably laid the foundation, though none of us saw it, for what came this summer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that relationship has definitely been a defining factor in American politics, obviously, because he's now his vice president nomination. and he had that opportunity to speak with him. And as Vance has become more magnified, and I'm not saying that's necessarily a negative thing, he's definitely flip-flopped on some issues anyways.
Every
Every
politician,
politician has at some point, so I don't think we can really get upset about it. But yeah, I think Vance is definitely the favorite. I can't really imagine anybody overtaking him. The only person I could see really giving him a run for his money is Glenn Youngkin, especially if Youngkin wins that 26 Senate race. But also, I think that there's really, especially in the event that Trump does lose this cycle, it would be likely to be a red midterm.
right?
And because if Trump wins, it's just going to be Vance anyways. So that's the take for that side. I think on the Democratic side, it's a little bit more interesting. I think there's a lot of different ways that it could go. Obviously, Harris will be running for re-election if she does win in 2028, so that's irrelevant. In the case that she does lose, I think a lot of eyes are going to turn towards Gavin Newsom, honestly, and I think that Gavin Newsom is really the only Democrat who can build a national profile. I think that as much as Gretchen Whitmer and Josh Shapiro have the chance to have electorally advantageous positions, I don't think either of them are going to be capable of building a national profile in a primary. I don't think that they're going to be able to appeal across the bases in a way that's going to be able to get them the delegates that they need to get the nomination. And honestly, I really would just see Newsom as an odds-on favorite. I don't think Walz is really going to be. Well, Tim Walz is your stereotypical like vice. I mean, he's like Mike Pence. Mike Pence could have never won a Republican primary, but he was a good VP pick. I think Walz is a relatively good VP pick. Shapiro probably would have been better, but that's another discussion.
Right.
But yeah, I really do think Newsom is the only one who can truly build a national profile in the Democratic primary.
I tend to agree, but I think if the Harris campaign would have originally went with Shapiro, Newsom probably would have still had a slight advantage, but I could see it have been being a very close race.
You're saying the race between Shapiro
and
Newsom
in 28 in the case that Kamala lost.
Okay. Yeah, I would I'd say it probably would have spent Josh Shapiro.
Well,
if they were to lose this election and he was VP, probably wouldn't have been a good idea to come back to the stage after that.
That's fair.
I still think that Newsom is the best choice in a predictive sense. Him against Vance on a national stage would be really interesting. I think it would be one of the more because as much as we've seen polarizing elections in recent years as far as personalities go, I think that a Vance and Newsom election would be more polarizing in a policy sense than maybe we've seen in our lifetimes.
Yeah, that it definitely has the potential to be, because there's a lot of things that you can dig up on either side, really, in terms of policy and political opinions that most Americans would look at and probably be like, oh, that sounds kind of crazy. I mean, obviously some of the stuff with Vance I agree with, but most, your middle of the road Americans would probably look at it and go, huh.
Yeah.
And even with Gavin Newsom as well, they'd also just look at some of the stuff that's going on with transgender kids and everything in California, and also go huh. So whereas this election is whereas 2024 is a battle of I don't like their personalities, I just want to vote for who's going to give me a better life. I feel like 2028, if it's Vance versus Newsom, could be a complete opposite, where it's
yeah,
I don't like either policy. Who's more trustworthy?
Yeah, I don't know that it would be that simple. I think there would definitely be questionable policies on both sides as far as a middle of the road voter goes. Obviously, that's not what I think about Vance, and that's more of what I think about Newsom. But I think that you'd see more attention given to those questionable policies, and their personalities would be less of a focus.
That's
which would be good for the country, because we're finally talking about policy. And honestly, it's probably a lot of the reason why a lot of the more socialist policies have been able to slip their way in, because we've been so focused on personality for the last 8 years.
Right. Yeah, no, that's totally fair, 100%. Kind of closing this segment out, let's talk about 24. Kind of moving back, looking still ahead. What is the state of the race right now? I know that you are a massive nerd for the polls.
Yes, I am.
If y'all want to see this man geek out, then just pay it close attention for the next few minutes. So what's the state of race right now, and what are your predictions looking like?
So here's the thing. I came on the show. When was it? Was it April?
I think so.
And
April or May.
you asked me, can Trump win? And I said the answer is yes because he's winning right now, and that only increased throughout the summer, and that was a fun time. This has become one of the most. Since then, everything that you could possibly imagine has happened, and I have no freaking clue what is happening. I have no idea. From a data perspective, from a vibes perspective, no clue. Absolutely no idea. Like, I had my finger on the pulse, like, even just like this July, I had a feel for where things were headed. I had a good read on what was going on, and now I have no freaking clue. And let me explain to you why this is so weird. In 2016, obviously the polls underestimated Trump. A lot of the reason why the polls underestimated Trump was because his numbers were so low. Hillary was actually underestimated in a lot of the polling that was taken. A lot of the averages in the swing states had her sitting around 46, 47%. And that was about accurate for where she was at in a lot of these states. And Trump was able to just grab enough of the undecided vote in the polls to get him over the edge. And the reason that I predicted that Trump would win in 2020 was because I just expected that same thing to happen. And the same effect did happen. And it actually happened in a more strong sense. The difference was that Biden was around 50% in a lot of the polls. So here's what makes this so interesting. If you look at just Trump +1, Harris +1, and like, I prefer to use the Real Clear Politics averages rather than the statistical analysis ones, because the statistical analysis ones like 538 Silver Bulletin are interesting. You never know what happens with those algorithms, and a lot of times the algorithms do favor Democrats, especially because polling does systematically favor Democrats to some extent. I'll get to why that might be a smaller factor in this cycle. But when Trump, like, as far as like a Trump +1, Harris +1 sense, Harris is polling significantly worse than both Biden and Hillary as far as like percentage leading. Like, if you look through the swing states right now on Real Clear Politics, you have a tie in Pennsylvania. Trump is up a point in North Carolina, couple points in Georgia, couple points in Arizona. He's down a point in Wisconsin and down a point in Michigan. And those are, I'm pretty sure Biden was ahead by 8% in the Michigan polls in 2020. Wow. Like, and he won by 3, so it underestimated Trump by about 5. So by that, you would just think, oh, well, Trump's going to win based on that polling error, and we'll get to another reason again on that in a second. But Harris is also polling not as well as Biden, but significantly better than Hillary as far as percentage gained. There's not very many undecided voters in this election. If you look at the Wisconsin average, it's currently Harris 49 and Trump 48.2. That's not a lot of undecided voters, especially after what we've been looking at in the last few election cycles. So that being said, I have no idea what's going on. I think based on the data, I would give Trump a slight edge. But also, like, I mean, like, Wisconsin is the only example where Biden and Hillary were actually really overestimated. So maybe I'd give Trump an advantage there. But the polls are a toss-up, and I don't know what to expect. And the biggest reason I don't know what to expect is because I think the shy Trump effect might be gone. And that's what I think that a lot of conservatives need to think about going into this election. Because what you're going to see is Trump was okay, it's November 6th. Wake up in the morning, Kamala Harris has 270 electoral votes. You're going to see a lot of people on Twitter saying, oh my gosh, Donald Trump was polling so much better in this election and he still lost. It's rigged. It's like, maybe, I don't know, maybe it is. But also, like,
for the sake of YouTube guidelines, 2020 was the safest, most effective, most certified,
it's
most fortified, the best election, most fair election, most secure in American history. YouTube, we promise.
Just for the record. But yeah, like, you're going to see a lot of conservatives get on social media and start complaining about the fact that it was rigged. But Trump has a much more public following now. It is significantly more socially acceptable to support Donald Trump today than it was 4 years ago, and even more than 8 years ago.
Oh.
And, well, actually, I'd argue is probably actually less socially acceptable in 2020 than 2016. But that's another discussion to have another time, I guess. But that being said, I think the shy Trump effect is probably gone. So I don't know how much he's really going to gain. I think what Republicans would bank on in this sense would be actual bad polling that systematically favors Democrats. The place you're going to go to for that is Wisconsin, because Wisconsin was the only one that was legitimately bad polling. Like, I think Michigan was off by a couple points. Pennsylvania was off by, I think actually the RCP average nailed Pennsylvania last year as far as margin win. But Wisconsin is really the only place you can go to and be like, okay, yeah, that was bad polling. It wasn't just like a miss. It was bad polling that's out of the margin of error, and also not only overestimated Biden/Hillary, but underestimated Trump. So that's the long-winded answer to say I really don't know what's going on. This is probably the closest election since 2000, and it could be closer. And I mean that in the sense of across the board. I don't mean that in the sense of it's going to come down to 500 votes in Florida.
It might.
But I really don't think that we're going to know the answer to this on November 5th. And I don't mean that because we're going to be counting 4 trillion mail-in votes. I mean that just because it's going to be close.
Right.
I think if the election happened today, you'd probably see Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada. Nevada, for the record, it's a swing state. Its math is pretty irrelevant to this election, which is unfortunate for Republicans because they're finally making some gains there. The 6 votes in Nevada basically don't matter. If Trump wins Nevada and like the Sun Belt states, then he doesn't get to 270. If he picks off one of the Rust Belt states without Nevada, he wins the election. If you just take away Arizona, he just needs Georgia and Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, by far the most important state just from a math perspective. But yeah, it's really close. The thing that really concerns me more than anything, though, is the vibes. Because if I'm being completely honest, the vibes aren't there. And I don't know why that is. But, like, I mean, we all watched the Georgia-Alabama game.
I did.
We know you did. But we all watched the Georgia-Alabama game. Many of us have been watching playoff baseball. And I could probably count on one hand. I might not even need my entire hand to count how many Trump ads I saw. And the Kamala ads are everywhere. They are being outspent so badly on advertisements. And I don't know if that will like be a nail in the coffin on election day. But from my source inside of campaigns, he really thinks we're cooked. Based on, and I know that this is vibes related for the most part because the data suggests that it is pretty close. One discussion that we had was he said that he compared it to John McCain close. That's not the case because John McCain was ahead and then Obama shot off, and on that same time frame where it was close, Trump was making gains. It hasn't projected the same way. So I don't agree with that take. But like again, this is a guy who's on the inside. Like this is a guy who knows what's going on, and he thinks that he thinks that Kamala is going to win. So I don't know how this will play out in the next couple of months. Another thing to keep in mind too is that the closeness of the polling is the reason why the statistical models are close, guys. Statistical models are literally just a different picture of polling. It's that simple. It's projections of where polling is going to be on election day. And it's that simple. Like, and the reason and the massive misses in polling the last couple cycles are why you all hate Nate Silver. Like Nate Silver was one of the biggest.
I knew this was coming.
Nate Silver was one of the biggest.
I knew this was
the
coming.
biggest pro. I don't want to say pro Trump because he's liberal, but like he was advocating for the idea that Trump was winning more than anybody. And before that debate, he actually had it projected that Trump was going to win. And the reason you all hate Nate Silver is because the polls were wrong. The reason you all hate Nate Silver is because his model is based off of polling that was wrong. And it's not his fault. And he's actually a smart guy who looks at things objectively. And that's why I stand with him over I'm going to use my 13 keys to the presidency to justify my gut feeling, Alan Lichtman. And I have plenty of thoughts about Alan Lichtman's approach to this.
Such as...
everything, dude. the thing about Alan Lichtman, again, he uses the keys to justify his gut feeling on the elections, and he is a great election predictor. But also, if you look back at a couple of elections, every time that he's been wrong, 5 keys flipped. If you use your brain, there's 5 keys flipped this election. So, and it's been a very narrow loss, and the election's very narrow. So, based off data, if I'm looking at data and I'm shutting my brain off, Trump has a tiny advantage that could be erased in a heartbeat. If I'm going off the vibes, Harris is building momentum toward an election day win. And we've got 33 days to figure out what's going to happen.
In that 33 days, make sure you are registered to vote. All your friends and family are registered to vote. And just make sure, because if we want to make sure that we're going to win this, we got to get as many people on our side registered. We can't afford to have the 2020 or the post-2020 attitude of, oh, it's all rigged, so I'm not going to vote. No. For sake of YouTube, it's not going to be rigged. It's going to be another safe, secure election. Yeah. But to make sure that it does happen that way, you got to go out there, register to vote, get all your friends and family registered to vote, and we got to get as many people. We got to make this the biggest Republican turnout in American
30 million
history.
Bible-believing Christians did not vote in 2020. The election was decided by 44,000 votes. Do not stay on your couch.
Do not stay at home. Do not stay at home. We got, whether you vote early or whether you go on election day.
If you have to vote by mail, do it.
The Trump campaign this time is promoting it.
It's almost like they were fine with it last time and didn't admit it.
It's a last resort. It's a last resort. If you can vote in person, do that. But if you have to,
voting
vote by
mail is not ideal, but it is probably generally okay. It's probably not all rigged, even if it is rigged.
Just partially, but
it's probably not all rigged.
You know, my parents text me today about a family dispute with one of our cousins. He's been a lifelong Republican. He voted for Trump in 2016. He voted for Trump in 2020, but we just found out that he's going to be voting for Kamala Harris.
Liz Cheney.
To think that all of this could have been avoided if he hadn't have died.
Huh? I'm confused.
If he hadn't
oh. Gosh. That's crazy. That's insane.
All right.
Crazy.
To kind of rein things back in a little bit.
Yeah.
As many of y'all know, I'm originally from North Carolina. North Carolina has recently been hit by a massive Hurricane Helene, the after effects of which have been absolutely horrendous. They're still finding dead bodies. They're still finding people that have been missing. I think last I heard, there's over 600, if not more, people still missing. And it's a very, very serious problem that we have got to get everybody who can. If you can afford to donate to organizations like Samaritan's Purse, please do it. If you can afford to send water or anything like that, please do it. If you can afford to even go down to North Carolina and help out in any way, please do it. There have been some unconfirmed reports that I've heard on Twitter today where some local governments are supposedly telling people that are trying to help that are private citizens that they need to stop or they're going to get arrested. I don't know how accurate those reports are, but if they are, that's incredibly terrifying and insane. I don't know why in the world why they would be doing that. And I know a lot of people who are in the area who've said that they haven't seen, they claim that FEMA's down there helping out. They haven't seen anybody. A lot of people still have not seen anybody. So it's a mess. It's a mess.
Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, I grew up north. I grew up in Western New York, so I don't have a lot of experience working or being around natural disasters. I haven't really followed the policy on it. It's probably one of the areas that I just don't really understand how things work on. But if those reports are true, then that's definitely an issue.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I just lost my train of thought.
Hurricanes.
Hurricanes, yeah. Yeah, it's been a mess. We've been praying for the victims. My family was affected. They just got power back on Tuesday night. They lost it Friday. Um, Luckily, my area wasn't as severely hit as some of the areas in the mountains, but some of the places in the mountains, man, it's rough. But if you can afford to donate, afford to support, afford to do anything like that, please do. And I've been purposely not talking about this in this way because I wanted to be respectful to the victims, but I think that enough time has kind of gone by and we've made enough progress where I can talk about this with a clean conscience. I think that this disaster could end up having a lot of political implications that not a lot of people are talking about.
I mean, if there's going to be some sort of political effect, it's going to be in North Carolina and Georgia. Um, we can talk about the mechanics of the electoral map maybe later. If Georgia and North Carolina go blue, the election was over long before that.
That's fair.
I think that especially North Carolina, like Georgia, yes, but
Mhm.
especially North Carolina, if those states go for Harris, the election was over before it got to that point. Um, and those are really the only places I could see it making a big difference, just because of like the emotional impact of that and the people voting. Like, as somebody from up north, and I don't mean this to sound like unempathetic, but like when we hear about natural disasters, really, it's like, oh, there's another hurricane. Like, and I don't mean that in the sense of like, we don't care about the victims or we don't want people to be helped. I agree with everything you said. But it just doesn't affect it doesn't affect people very much up north. It definitely doesn't affect their votes. So if it doesn't affect the people at all, it's definitely not going to affect their votes. So I would kind of tend to be on the side of I don't think this could have any massive political impact. I mean, if it could give Trump the opportunity to maybe pull out of those states and reallocate resources, if the margins were to expand, then maybe that could be the biggest electoral impact. But I don't think it makes a huge difference on the election.
One thing I'm interested to see is that the response between the candidates for governor in North Carolina have been very, very interesting. As some of y'all might have seen a couple weeks ago, there was this huge story that came out about Mark Robinson that I've purposely been avoiding talking about, and I'm still going to avoid talking about, other than the fact that it was, whether or not it was true, it was very bad. Like, campaign ending bad.
Like really bad.
But something that I've seen is there has been a very noticeable in the state difference in the response between how Josh Stein reacted to this tragedy and how Mark Robinson has reacted to this tragedy. Mark Robinson has been in the mountains since Saturday, helping coordinate relief efforts and that kind of thing. Whereas on Sunday night, Josh Stein was at a fancy fundraiser, and I think earlier today was the first that I've seen him actually on the ground anywhere. And I can't help but wonder if that's not going to have at least some sort of effect on people when they go in November.
When you're down 10 points, it takes a lot.
It does.
It really takes a lot. And I mean, just on a personal note, like I'm not from North Carolina. If I was voting in that election, it frankly, after that story and what I believe the credibility of it is, I would probably be writing somebody in. But that aside, um, Mark Robinson was losing before the story dropped.
That's true.
And when you're down 10, 15%, you're kind of dead in the water. I mean, people are calling John Tester dead in the water in Montana right now, and he's down like 5. I really don't think that it's gonna have a massive impact. It may flip.
I haven't even been paying attention to Montana. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the Senate elections are kind of baked in right now. We can talk about that after we're done with the North Carolina
Okay.
stuff. But I mean,
I don't really. There's nothing much more that I wanted
Yeah.
to really discuss on that, so we can transition.
yeah,
to that
I
now.
really don't think it has much of an effect. I think Mark Robinson's DOA. At this
Yeah, I
point.
haven't
Like,
been paying. The only
Yeah.
thing I've been paying attention to Senate wise is I saw a couple of clips from the Virginia Senate debate last night between Tim Kaine and Hung Kao, and I think Hung Kao is a good candidate, but I think he kind of. I don't know if you caught any of it. He kind of struggled. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I haven't watched a lot of that election. I think there's significantly more consequential Senate elections this
True.
cycle. I did not watch the debate. I don't know much about Hung Kao, honestly. I actually went to church with him.
Yeah, you told me.
Yeah,
about
I
that.
I go to the same church as him over the summer. But again, I'm sure he's a great guy. Um, I don't know how strong of a candidate he is, and regardless, you kind of need a perfect candidate and a perfect situation. I mean, to get Glenn Youngkin
I was
to
about
get
to say-
to get Glenn Youngkin to win by 1 point, you needed a conservative who looks like he's moderate and a complete and total collapse. Oh, a red environment and a complete and total collapse and major gaffe from Terry McAuliffe, and he won by 1%. We're in a presidential year with Tim Kaine as the incumbent, so the likelihood of a victory extremely low. Regardless of a debate performance, I don't know how it went, but
Which Senate elections are you looking at right now the most?
so that's a tricky thing. Is based on the numbers, there's really only 2 Senate elections that look super competitive right now, and those are Ohio and Montana. And even Montana really doesn't look super competitive right now. Jon Tester's getting unseated by Tim Sheehy. That's pretty much unquestioned at this point, honestly. You've got currently Tim Sheehy's up 6%, and you have to imagine that with Trump at the top of the ticket in Montana, that's only a margin that's going to grow. Um, the other one that I'm looking, and so just for the record, right now it's 51 Democrats, 49 Republicans. Republicans will be picking up Joe Manchin's seat. That all major election forecasters consider that a safe pickup. So we'll pick up West Virginia and then pick up Montana. I argue, I mean, a lot of people have it as a lean Republican state. I currently have it as a likely Republican state. I'd be very surprised if Jon Tester was able to mount some sort of a comeback. The one that's maybe the most interesting is Ohio. Right now you've got Sherrod Brown ahead of Bernie Moreno by 3.7%, which normally if I see in a swing state someone's up 3.7%, that's normally they're in pretty good shape. But it's not the case here with Sherrod Brown. I actually really think Bernie Moreno is going to win this race. You've got Brown at 46.5% and Moreno at 42.8%. So is Brown up 3.7%? Yes. However, there's roughly, let's do some quick math here. We've got about 88 point, so we got about 11% of the vote unaccounted for. 11% are not going to be voting third party. And with Trump at the top of the ticket, he's going to win Ohio by 10 points.
Right.
He might win Ohio by more than 10 points. I don't know. He's going to win it by 10 points.
At least.
And there's just no way that Sherrod Brown can grab enough of those undecided voters to get him the win. So I really think Bernie Moreno, unless something changes in that race, I would expect Bernie Moreno to pick up that seat on election night, which would get Republicans up to 52 seats in the Senate. Some other ones to keep an eye on right now you've got is the Rust Belt states. Eric Hove has drastically closed the margin with Tammy Baldwin. He was down 6 to 8% just a couple months ago, and now he's closed the gap to 3.5%.
Wow.
And you're talking about an election here in a state, again, with bad polling. Like, I'm not willing to say that Michigan and Pennsylvania have that bad of polling. Wisconsin, bad polling. And right now, Baldwin's at 49.6%. So that is pretty high, and she is an incumbent. But even if she ticks down to 48, and let's say Trump wins Wisconsin, I could easily see Eric Hove getting over the level there to get him over the top.
I mean, looking at some of the recent numbers, you've got Baldwin +2, Baldwin +7, Baldwin +1, Baldwin +7, Baldwin +2. It's all over the place.
It's all over the place, and really the thing that I would point to is first off one of the Baldwin +2 ones is Trafalgar, which is just they hit 2016 and now they just suck. New York Times Siena has Baldwin +7. Marquette has Baldwin +7. Atlas Intel actually did really well in 2020. That has Baldwin +1, but again, maybe that was just a one-off. They're kind of all over the place, and right now I would still say, even if Trump does win Wisconsin, I'd give a slight edge to Tammy Baldwin. But in the event that Trump did win Wisconsin on Election Day, I could easily see Eric Hove getting over the level to get him to that point. And again, this is also it was worse when Biden was the nominee. But Democratic Senate candidates in the Midwest are running about 3% better than Harris across the board. And you see that's particularly applicable in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania because they have incumbents and strong incumbents running. But yeah, again, you're looking at a similar situation here in Pennsylvania, though, where I would be shocked if Bob Casey went down, but Bob Casey's at 48.8%. David McCormick's at 44.8%. That's a closable gap with undecided vote, especially, again, if it's a good night for Trump. David McCormick could get over 48.8%. Like, he really could. And, again, I would give Casey the edge, even in a Trump victory. But that's a very jumpable margin. And then you have Michigan as well, where they're doing the worst based on numbers. It's also the most blue state. But there's no incumbent running here. And Alyssa Slotkin, while she's up 3%, is only at 47.3. You could easily make the argument that Michigan is the ripest pickoff out of the three. So you've got that whole Rust Belt trio. I'm not going to spend too much time on the Western races. Kari Lake, Arizona Republicans. Let's have a heart-to-heart.
Oh, boy.
Why? Why do you do this to us? Please, why? I know that Trump endorsed her. I know. But why? Why do you keep blowing it? Why do you keep nominating the worst candidates ever? The Arizona Republican Party is a disaster. Martha McSally again? And then Kari Lake? And then Kari Lake again? You guys can't even vote for Blake Masters over Abe Holiday. You guys suck.
You had one job with Blake Masters, and you failed.
Well, they've had a lot of jobs
Well,
across the, and the Arizona Republican Party just cannot nominate candidates, and it hurts to watch. But anyways, Kari Lake is getting her butt kicked. She's down 7. I could see a world where Trump wins by 3 and Lake loses by 5. I could really see Trump outperforming her by 8 points. It wouldn't shock me at all. Ruben Gallego will win that race regardless of whether or not Trump wins the election, wins the Arizona electoral votes. And then Maryland, I'm not paying a ton of attention to Maryland. It's interesting because Larry Hogan is there. But that being said, Larry Hogan being there is only going to matter so much. Again, top of the ticket. Harris at the top of the ticket. And then the one that I find really the most interesting is the Nevada Senate race. Like, interesting in the sense of, like, not that it's close, but I'm surprised that Jackie Rosen is doing as well as she is.
Yeah.
She's a relatively, I mean, I don't know anything about her popularity, but, like, she's not the most known senator. She doesn't have a big profile. Frankly, Catherine Cortez Masto has a bigger profile than she does, and they're senators from the same state. But she's killing Sam Brown. And a lot of that is because there's a lot of undecided vote. She is sitting at 49.5%, though. And that's another situation where I actually just don't really understand. And to be fair, I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to Sam Brown's campaign. Right. I haven't paid a whole lot of attention. I hate to say this. Maybe it's an optics thing.
I didn't want to say it, but it's possible.
It's possible. I think he could. I mean, he's not going to lose by 8 points. Like, he'll probably lose by 3 to 4 in the result that in the the chance that Trump wins. If Trump, in the scenario that Trump wins, he probably loses by 3 to 4. I am very surprised that he's not performing as well.
It has to be optics. I can't think of anything else.
Because Jackie Rosen's not a particularly fantastic candidate.
What is Trump's margin right now in Nevada?
Right now, I believe Harris is up about a point. Let me pull it. Yeah, it's Harris plus 1.1%.
And it's Rosen plus
Rosen
8?
It's Rosen plus 8, but it's also Rosen polling a point higher than Harris. Harris is at 48.6 and Rosen is at 49.5. So I don't get it. It doesn't make a lot of sense because it's like in Arizona it makes sense because Kari Lake is awful,
right?
But Sam Brown is not the same level of awful, and really the only thing I can think of is optics. It's really all I can think of.
I hate to say it, and it sucks to say it. I don't want to say it,
but it might be true.
It might be true,
and we can't say that authoritatively. And maybe things will change, but I find it really hard to believe.
I mean, we've got 30 days. I don't see how much we can change that much in 30 days on the individual statewide levels with these
So
smaller Senate
yeah.
races.
So
but
just on the bigger picture level, you can bank on Republicans gaining control of the Senate. The Democrats won't be picking up Texas or Florida. I've seen a couple close polls out of both of those. And the poll,
but this is the year Texas is gonna go blue.
yeah. Here's the thing,
No,
like
it's not.
every year was the year Pennsylvania was going to go red until it wasn't. Every year is going to be the year that Texas goes blue until it doesn't. So it's like, eventually, it'll probably happen eventually.
At some point,
Maybe, I don't know. We'll have to see down the line.
if the border stays the way it is, it will happen sometime soon. But
anyways, we've got a lot of elections until then. So you can bank on Republicans getting back control of the Senate and sitting at least 51 seats. I'd set the ceiling. Setting a ceiling is hard. But I would probably set a 54 ceiling because I do see a world where they can sweep the Rust Belt trio, and I don't see that. Yeah, I'll say 53. I'll say 53.
Okay.
I don't think they get all three, although I can see a world. I think it's incredibly unlikely they get more than 53. But also it's splitting hairs at that point. Republicans will have Senate control come November.
where are we looking at for 26 for open Senate seats?
The 26 open Senate seats will be the same map as 2020. So
Oh,
the number
dear.
one thing to keep your mind on is will Susan Collins retire, which I would consider to be relatively likely. Although I don't know the exact demographics of that. I don't know exactly what she's thinking. It's probably the more even split Senate map. The 2028 map is a little bit more difficult for Republicans. The 2024 map is more difficult for Democrats. The Democrats are defending so many seats right now, and the Republicans don't have any vulnerable seats. One thing to actually keep in mind that I've been seeing, and I don't know, and I don't really think this will play. It's probably going to be another Pat. Who was the old Kansas senator? He ran against an incumbent. And no, he didn't run against an incumbent. There was an independent that ran against him. His name was Greg Orman. I don't remember. Pat Roberts. In Kansas in 2014. Lots of people thought that Orman could have pulled it off. He didn't. So I'm hoping that it's going to play out like that. But I'm seeing some really strange polling out of Nebraska that shows that Deb Fischer is in trouble against a insurgent independent that the Democrats have backed out of the race on.
Interesting.
A lot of polling that frankly shows her losing. So I don't think that she will lose that, especially in a red election year. But the amount of polling that I've seen and the consistent amount of polling that I've seen that has her tied or losing is a little bit concerning.
As we just had some weird technical difficulties. I don't know where that came from. It's almost time for me to end the show, anyways. But we'll kind of end off on a more lighthearted note. What are the Bills gonna do to recover?
Oh gosh, I didn't know that was coming. I should have assumed. Trade for Devontae Adams. I don't know what to think about this team right now. I think that the likely outcome, and I don't want to use injuries as an excuse because that's just weak. We're missing an all-pro slot corner. We're missing 2 starting linebackers. We're probably playing the wrong people at safety. I'm sorry, DeMar Hamlin. You're just not good at football.
Despite the fact you have a 1-1 kill-death ratio right now.
No, seriously. I think the Bills are a good team. I think Sunday is going to tell us a lot about this team. But again, the Bills are hurt right now. And it's a team that's going to get better throughout the year because it's still Josh Allen getting used to playing without a number one receiver. And that being said, the Adams rumors are real. The idea of the move confuses me a bit because I don't know why the Bills would use this year to kind of reset the roster and then go make an all-in move to go trade for Davante Adams, who has 3 years left on his contract, but based on the way that the cap savings based on the future years, the way the contract is built, the odds of them not cutting him are extremely low. Just basically a rental. I don't know why you make that move, but we have an extra second round picks from the Diggs trade, and if you're going to make a panic move, you've only got a couple weeks to do it. And I mean, watching Josh Allen to Davante Adams for a little bit would be fun. So it would probably change but then again, like the whole everybody eats thing, we don't have any star receiver might change. But also you saw the problems with that against the Ravens, where you have Josh Allen running all over the field and just nobody's open. Like the one big play they were able to make was because he got within a yard of the sideline and somehow threw it across his body to Khalil Shakir, whose safety forgot that he existed, because who the heck is going to make that throw other than Josh Allen? But I don't know. I don't know what this team is. I think the game against the Texans will say a lot about them. But yeah, I don't know if it's going to be the 11, because I came into the year expecting 11-6 and maybe a playoff run. And then my expectations were quickly ratcheted to 14-3, and we're winning the Super Bowl after we beat the Jags by a lot. So I don't know what's happening. Kind of like the election. We'll see what happens.
My heart for our friendship wants the Bills to do good, but my fantasy team is relying on CJ Stroud and Diggs. So we'll see what happens.
I'll say this, Mike. I don't know how our offense will do against their defense, but what I do know is that CJ Stroud's a second-year quarterback who is about to get so confused watching Sean McDermott's zone defensive scheme. I think that he will struggle against. I would be surprised if the Texans were able to put more than 24. I mean, 24 is a decent amount of points, but I'd be surprised if the Texans score more than 21 to 24 points on Sunday. Question is, how many can the Bills get up? Especially if Khalil Shakir is hurt. If Khalil Shakir is hurt, we don't have a number one receiver, but he is the number one receiver. So basically what I'm saying is go Yankees. Because I don't know how else I'm going to be able to make it through the next few weeks of sports. Which, if the Yankees don't win,
NHL's going right now too, right?
The NHL starts tomorrow, actually, with the Sabres. The Sabres are playing the Devils.
I saw Predators got a win to.
It was preseason.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But yeah, the first regular season game is on Friday. Sabres and Devils. Although I love the Sabres, they haven't made the playoffs since I was 8. So it's kind of hard to get excited for the Sabres anymore, especially since last year we were excited for the Sabres and then they weren't good. So, that's one thing. NBA starting up soon. I don't know why the Knicks traded for Karl Anthony Towns, but here we are. So basically the Bills just got the brakes blown off them. The Sabres are starting another disappointing year. The Knicks made a senseless trade for Karl Anthony Towns, which once they win the finals, I'm going to come back on here and I'm going to have to apologize for that as a Knicks fan. So go Yankees, because right now we're the only team that's left. If you take the 4 teams left in the American League, the Yankees have a $309 million payroll, and the combined payroll of the other 3 teams is $331 million. So if we don't make the World Series this year, I don't know. I don't know what I'll do. I do not know what I'll do. But anyways, that's the miserable life of me as a sports fan.
I know I said that would be the last question, but this is the last question. That last actual question. We both share a common bond for Liberty University.
It's true.
In the preseason, it looked like Liberty had a good shot to go to the playoffs. Now it's looking like Boise State's probably going to get that 12th seed, especially now that Liberty and App State got canceled because of the hurricane. Mm-hmm. What is your expectation as a Flames fan for the rest of this season?
Well, the expectation should be to be undefeated because our conference is so weak. I think at this point, this season is about the future. This season is about getting into the Mountain West or the Pac-12.
Is that where you see us going?
or the American, one of the three. Even if it means staying in the group of 5, this season's about moving up. I don't.
Do you not think there's a solid chance we get into the Sun Belt? I mean, I don't think there
Why
is
would we
right
want?
now.
Why would Liberty go to the Sun Belt?
I don't know. There's a lot. I feel like there's a lot of regional competition, like App State, James Madison, Coastal.
So that's the unfortunate thing is that it used to be that college football was a regional game, and it's just not anymore.
That's true.
And it was what made college football great. And now that college football is a national game, like the regional rivalries against JMU and all that, like sure that would be cool. But the reality is, if Liberty is going to continue to grow as a program, the Mountain West and the Pac-12, or maybe the American is the way to go. So I mean, especially with Ashton Genty, like having an actual Heisman contender on their team, as long as Boise State doesn't blow like 2-3 games, they're probably going to find their way to sneak into the playoffs just for the viewership. At the very least, getting eyes on him. He's gonna draw more viewers than Liberty, just frankly.
That's fair.
And he's gonna give them a better shot to have some sort of transcendent win in a way that Liberty probably wouldn't have a chance to do. So I think it's unfortunate. I think losing the App State game was just the end of it. Beating ECU was fine, but like we were favored. We were still favored to beat App State. It was still a weak schedule. The difference is that we're not pummeling people the way we were last year.
Right.
And because I honestly, even if the App State game was still on the schedule, the fact that we're beating Conference USA teams by 10 instead of 30 is just enough to because that was our resume last year, was that we beat all the Conference USA teams by 35 points every game. And I just don't think they have a resume this year. I think this is a year about the future, and I think they need to focus on getting into the American or the Pac-12.
All right. That's fair. Do you think that the Pac-12 is going to ever climb back up the Power 5, or are we looking at now just a glorified group of 6 conference?
I don't honestly know how organized college football is going to stay in its current state. I think it's a question of when, not if, the Super League happens. I think Liberty gets into the Super League. I think they get in the relegation kind of range. But yeah, I think it's really a question of when it becomes Super League, FBS, FCS, rather than when that's going to figure itself out. I really think that's within the next few years.
Whenever the Super League pops up, I hope they install Josh Pate as the commissioner. We need Josh Pate as college football commissioner. Well, Micah, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thanks for having me. It's a fun time.
Great to hear you yap for a bit. Always great to hear you yap. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for joining. Remember, be praying for people in North Carolina. If you can donate. If you can support. Remember to register to vote. Get all your friends and family registered to vote. This is an incredibly important election, and we need everybody on deck. God loves you, and so do I. Thank you, and have a fantastic Thursday night.
Mm-hmm.